started, I'll just run through and introduce each of our participants for today. We have from left to right, the Honourable Rob Lantz, Minister of Housing, Land and Communities, PEI. The Honourable John Lohr, Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, Nova Scotia. The Honourable Sean Fraser, Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities, Government of Canada. The Honourable Jill Green, Minister responsible for the New Brunswick Housing Corporation, New Brunswick. And the Honourable Paul Pike, Minister responsible for the Newfoundland and Labrador Housing, Newfoundland. Minister Lohr is going to begin as host of today's meeting with a few brief remarks. Go ahead, Minister.
Okay, thank you, Krista. So it's my pleasure to host my colleagues from the other Atlantic provinces and the federal government today to develop a shared path forward on housing in Atlantic Canada. Our meeting today builds on discussions at the Council of Atlantic Premiers meeting where housing was identified as one of the priorities for the region. Today we had meaningful discussions about the unique challenges in Atlantic Canada, like our predominantly rural and aging populations with a higher proportion of low-income households that will require unique solutions that are responsive to the realities of our region. We also discussed our region's unique strengths, our spirit of collaboration, our can-do attitude, as well as the emerging new industries like modular construction that will enable us to work together to tackle these challenges. We are excited about the opportunity presented by the regional population growth, and we must be willing to try new things in new ways. I am encouraged by a clear demonstration today of shared commitment to do things differently, faster, and more collaboratively for the benefit of everyone. There are still many details to work out as we work with our federal partners on a tailored framework for the Atlantic provinces. What I can say is that the Atlantic provinces and the Government of Canada will take bold action so people, families have access to housing they need. With that, I would like to turn to my colleague, the Honourable Sean Fraser, for his comments.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Minister Lohr, as our host, for putting together an important conversation on housing in Atlantic Canada. Perhaps before I get into the specifics of what was discussed today, just as somebody who grew up here in Nova Scotia, I just want to reflect for a moment on the importance of addressing the housing challenges that our region's facing. My whole life, I watched everybody my age move away from Atlantic Canada. When I first ran for office in 2015, the way that this manifested itself in my hometown involved the closure of a local elementary school because so many young families moved away, and the loss of the mental health unit at the largest regional hospital on the mainland in northern Nova Scotia. When we have people move away from our communities, the impact is felt in a very real way by people who live in real communities where our neighbors live and call home. We have different challenges today. Over the last couple of years, as a result of decisions taken by governments and some human behavioral patterns that emerged over the course of the COVID-19 pandemic, we've seen people moving to Atlantic Canada in numbers that we've never witnessed in our lives, certainly over the course of my life. This creates enormous social and economic opportunities, but it presents challenges that we need to address. One of those challenges involves building more homes to accommodate the people who want to move to our communities and to contribute to life in Atlantic Canada. I can tell you as a representative of communities in Nova Scotia, the challenges associated with growth are ones I would prefer over to losing schools and hospital services 7 days a week. That doesn't mean they're easy to overcome, but it means we need to tackle those challenges if we want to continue to benefit from the enormous economic opportunities that population growth can create. In addition to the existing programs involving supports for vulnerable populations, affordable housing construction, what I'm excited about today is our agreement to develop a tailored framework that's going to help us build more homes faster that is specific to Atlantic Canada. Among other things, this framework is going to include supports to grow the factory-built home industry here in Atlantic Canada. We're going to include specifically a chapter dedicated to Atlantic Canada in the federal catalog of pre-approved designs, and we're going to recognize the unique needs of Atlantic Canada with coordinated programs that capitalize on the federal apartment construction loan program and affordable housing funds. There are details that we need to nail down to formalize and finalize this framework, but agreeing on a tailored framework for Atlantic Canada is going to allow us to deploy the resources that we respectively commit to housing more effectively. In order to continue the work, we've discussed having our follow-up meeting in April of this year in Ottawa, and we'll have the opportunity to engage again this summer in Atlantic Canada. This is going to be a continued process where we collaborate to help build more homes as quickly as possible. But the first step is to agree that we're going to work together and put a little bit of structure to how that's going to happen. You can tell that we're all aligned in purpose. There is not a person sitting at this table that didn't make clear today their desire to build more homes in their community. And by working together, I have faith that we're going to be able to make that happen. Thank you very much. John, I believe it's back to you.
So I guess now we'll take questions, and if you can indicate which minister you want to have take the question, that would be great.
Minister Fraser, to go down to Grand Prairie, which we can see from our windows here, what would you tell somebody who's sleeping in a tent down there about what was accomplished by these meetings today?
Let me start by saying it would be a moral failure to accept that homelessness and chronic homelessness has to be part of life in Atlantic Canada or any part of the country. I will not feel like I've solved Canada's national housing crisis until everyone in Canada has a roof over their head. Stopping short of that would be to admit failure from the outset, in my opinion. Before I address how today's conversations is going to help, let me just say that the federal government's perspective is that we want to be a good partner, but we also realize that delivery in specific communities is going to be best done by local levels of government, whether that's provincial governments or municipalities who are closer to the ground. They're going to be able to better tailor the unique solutions that fit their own community. The solution in Halifax will not be the same as Vancouver, will not be the same as New Glasgow. We've put funding in place through the Reaching Home program to support communities that adopt local solutions. In fact, we don't wait for these kinds of events to showcase what we may have done. Just in December of this past year, we topped up the Reaching Home program to the tune of $100 million. So communities could continue to support people and keep them safe over the course of this winter alone. But we know that the long-term solution is not going to be stopgap measures where we continue to fund the emergency response. We need to do that in the intervening period. But what I take comfort from our conversations today is that we're going to be able to help build out that ecosystem of affordable housing that will provide permanent solutions to people who don't have a roof over their head. One of the challenges that we discussed today, quite frankly, and in a candid way, was the challenges that impact provincial governments when federal programs operate independently from the process of putting funding into affordable housing projects. When I talk about coordinating our programs, if we can help housing providers work with both federal and provincial governments simultaneously, so they don't find themselves in the solution where one government funds part of their project, but the other one has rejected it, that leaves a project without the ability to be complete, we can actually get more homes built that are going to support vulnerable populations. So what's top of mind for me when we're trying to build out more homes for our community is making sure that the most vulnerable are taken care of as we grow the overall supply to attract people who want to move here for economic reasons. So to those who've got loved ones who are struggling with inadequate housing supports, please know that we're working together to provide supplements and injections of cash for the emergency response. But the goal for me is to permanently end chronic homelessness in Canada, and we're not going to be able to do that on our own. It's going to take different levels of government working together as we've agreed to today. And the benefit, of course, for Atlantic Canada is to have a single coordinated framework that recognizes our realities on the ground in this region is going to enable us to do more quickly to support some of the most vulnerable in our communities.
For whoever would like to answer it. In here it says that there was interest in the design catalog and region-specific options in the catalog. Can we talk about some of the region-specific needs of housing in our provinces?
Happy to chime in, but I feel I'll leave it to one of you first to kick off.
I know in New Brunswick, for example, we have a very healthy modular construction sector, and it may not be as strong as some of the other Atlantic provinces, but we all want to use modular construction as a solution, as a piece of the solution for the housing crisis. So working with the entities that deliver those modular homes to have agreed upon designs means that for all Atlantic provinces, then we can all use the same designs and all the modular contractors can bid on the same projects and be on level playing field. So that's just an example of one of the things that we've talked about and what the advantage is, that then we can supply housing for all of Atlantic Canada, just not each in particular province.
When it comes to the national housing strategy, it was released with the goal of reducing homelessness by 50%. Just wondering, what evidence is there that that strategy is working?
In all honesty, I think it's an area that we need to get better data. We've had very serious challenges that were related to data collection during the COVID-19 pandemic that really delayed our ability to understand the progress that has been achieved as a result of the investments we've made through that program. In particular, when you are dealing with shelter organizations, for example, who can typically have 100% of their beds filled, but in the middle of the pandemic, you've got, or over the course of the pandemic, you have a few years of data where for public health reasons, they had to reduce their capacity dramatically. It really interrupts our ability to get good information about who's using services and how many people there may be in the community. We're starting to see the ability to monitor the situation stabilize now that we are in a post-pandemic normal. But the goal remains the same on the timeline indicated. The latest conversations I've had with our officials is that we believe it's ambitious, but we can achieve the target that you've outlined. But step number one is going to be getting in a better position to collect that data now that we're in a situation where public health isn't interfering with our ability to do so.
A question about what specific incentives did you discuss or are you introducing today for the modular industry?
So there's two categories, and please, if others want to chime in, I don't mean to take too much of the microphone. There are a series of different incentives that exist between provincial governments and the federal government, and different as between provincial governments.
Ones today, or you just talk about the existing ones?
So we are going to work towards establishing new and coordinated investments to help grow factory-built homes. Today did not include a new pocket of funding, but it is something we are agreeing to work towards as part of the tailored framework for Atlantic Canada. What is also going to help is the solution when I talk to folks who actually operate factories is not just investments that will help them scale up by purchasing that new piece of technology. That's part of the solution. Creating consistency in demand for a particular kind of home is a big deal for somebody who needs the certainty to justify a major investment, such as the construction of a new factory or the scaling up of an existing one. This is where the catalog of pre-approved designs is going to be particularly useful. If we signal across the region that there are going to be certain kinds of designs that will be provided at no cost to the builder, and we'll have a streamlined approval process, whether it's for federal support programs for affordable housing, being aligned with provincial building codes, or potentially for municipal permitting approvals, there will be more factories that will design themselves to print en masse the kinds of materials that are necessary to build out those kinds of homes. So there's progress with today's discussions towards establishing that basic demand in the market for particular kinds of projects that we'll work towards that's going to help the scale up, but there will be continued conversations about what financial incentives we will put in place through, for example, regional development agencies or provincial programs to help coordinate what supports we put in place to help them achieve scale.
And I think part of what we also talked about was that, there is the federal, this goes back to the data question, and there's, data collected by Canada Mortgage and Housing, Stats Canada, that's used for decision making, but each of the provincial jurisdictions have also recognized there's gaps in that data for Atlantic Canada because we're so small and rural. And so part of what we're talking about also is the data that we're collecting that can go together with the federal data then to support the housing needs that we have in Atlantic Canada and the specific ones that we're looking for. So part of the need for the meeting today was to get us all on the same level playing field, understand the outcomes that we all want to achieve, and then give us a couple of months to go back together, put that data together so we can have specific programs, probably within existing programs that we have now, but thinking about how to best apply them in Atlantic Canada.
Minister Fraser, there was reporting last week that said that federal staffers were warning, I don't know whether you were there 2 years ago or not, I don't think you were, that the immigration was outpacing housing, and that the Minister of the day knew what was happening and continued anyway. Can you just reflect on that?
I don't think anybody needs a briefing note to understand that having more people in a housing market impacts the housing market. But having gone through in consecutive years the process of building Canada's immigration levels plan, I can tell you that there are an enormous number of factors that go into them. Some of the things that we heard over the course of those processes was that during a healthcare crisis, we needed more doctors and nurses. A third of the doctors in Canada are newcomers. A quarter of the nurses in Canada are newcomers. We heard that we needed to increase the number of skilled tradespeople to meet the demands of businesses and to build more homes. And we heard on the heels of the pandemic that failing to address the labor shortage the country was facing would have resulted in the closure of potentially thousands of businesses who'd been kept afloat through the pandemic as a result of the programs we put in place to support them. We know that immigration continues to provide enormous social and economic benefits to Canada, but we need to build the housing to accommodate that population growth. But there is a challenge that remains when it comes to immigration that we need to address, and my colleague, Minister Miller, has been speaking about this the last few days in particular. The immigration levels plan is focused on the number of permanent residents that Canada brings in each year, many of whom already live here and are transitioning from temporary residency to permanent residency. The challenge that we have when it comes to our growing population that is putting an impact on our housing programs is largely through our temporary programs, so the Temporary Foreign Workers Program, or in particular the International Student Program. And this is where we have a serious issue that we need to address and are working to address now. The International Student Program in particular has grown just in the last couple of years by hundreds of thousands of people each year. There are some institutions in different parts of this country that I have the sincerely held belief have come to exist just to exploit the program for the personal financial gains of the people behind some of these schools, if we can call them that. When I see the way that they are bringing students in enormous numbers, sometimes with individuals who work in the immigration sector themselves, and they are not provided with housing, they're not provided with a quality education, and they're recruited here under the false pretense that they will qualify for permanent residency, it means that we've got a problem we've got to address. We're working now to create a trusted partner model with institutions who have a history of providing supports for students, and we'll give them preferred access to study permits. We're going to continue to work with employers to ensure that the workers that they bring here are in positions that could not be filled by a domestic worker who is looking for an opportunity to be meaningfully employed. So I don't want to suggest there are not challenges with the rapidity of population growth, but they're largely being driven by programs where the government doesn't set a target or cap, but they're driven by demand. That sort of system engages both federal and provincial responsibilities, given that provinces select which institutions actually are eligible for the International Student Program. But by working together across levels of government, we can restore a level of integrity that I think is needed to the program and help us achieve both our economic goals through immigration when appropriate and our home building goals by ensuring that population growth doesn't outstrip our ability to produce homes.
Je ne sais pas s'il y a quelqu'un qui parle français.
Il y a un peu, c'est difficile. J'ai envie de pratiquer. Pas plus long, s'il vous plaît, mais l'oreille est plus long.
La question était semblable à mon collègue de la CDC. Est-ce qu'il y a, je sais que vous dites que vous discutez d'aller de l'avant et vous discutez des solutions, mais est-ce qu'il y a des annonces concrètes de ce qui va être fait aujourd'hui, mis à part discuter des solutions?
Alors, nous avons beaucoup de discussions dans les problèmes en général et des solutions spécifiques. Mais aujourd'hui, nous avons des opportunités pour faire une annonce pour créer une initiative spécifique pour la région atlantique. C'est essentiel pour améliorer la coordination de nos programmes, les programmes provinciaux et fédéraux aussi. Avec le commitment de créer une initiative spécifique pour la région atlantique, c'est possible d'augmenter des investissements dans le secteur de construction dans des usines, par exemple. C'est important pour créer un chapitre spécifique pour la région atlantique dans les catalogues pour du logement. C'est essentiel aussi pour améliorer la coordination dans le programme pour la construction pour des appartements et aussi pour les programmes pour du logement abordable. Alors, c'est très important de continuer ces discussions. Les prochaines réunions dans avril de cette année au Ottawa, et je pense que nous avons des opportunités au septembre pour fournir des mesures concrètes pour cette initiative qui nous faisons de commitment aujourd'hui. C'est OK?
Oui.
OK, merci.
Minister, Pierre Poilievre, leader of the opposition, is suggesting immigration be tied to housing overall, that you don't bring people in if there isn't housing for them. Is that something the government would consider?
Well, look, when it comes to the programs that we have control over the numbers of federal, our permanent residency programs in particular, that is a major factor. And in fact, that was the reason that we've stabilized our immigration levels at the same figure last year as was put in place for this year's immigration levels plan. What Mr. Poilievre's statement indicates is, if I can be frank, a lack of understanding on who's responsible for different elements of the temporary programs that are driving rapid population growth. What we need to do rather than tie targets through the certain temporary programs is work with the institutions that actually drive that demand. Work with provincial governments who are responsible for indicating which institutions have access to the program. So is the idea of tying the number of people who come to Canada to the number of homes available a good one? Yes, and in fact, that's something that it's one of the factors that we've considered over the past number of years. But we need to recognize that we have to bring other players to the table, not just provincial counterparts, but the institutions who are dramatically increasing the number of study permits they request, sometimes at the personal financial gain of the people behind some of those private colleges.
Answer to my CBC colleague's question. You mentioned schools, you're critical of some schools that are going down this path without sufficient housing. Do you include the Cape Breton University in that?
I got to say, as somebody from the Northern Mainland and Nova Scotia, we've seen over the course of my time as a member of Parliament a positive impact of young people from other parts of the world who've chosen to move to Atlantic Canada. More recently, as we've seen during and since the pandemic, more people from within Canada move to our region as well. It's really caused a pinch on housing markets when you have the combined impact of growth in the international student program and growth in the overall population of Canada. My view is that the international students that have come to Nova Scotia have an opportunity to contribute meaningfully to our economy, and in the long term, it will prove to be a good thing for Nova Scotia. We do need to work with CBU and frankly with communities across the entirety of the province to ensure that we're building enough housing for them. But as recently as this morning, I was on the phone with the mayor of CBRM to discuss how we can support additional housing growth given the population growth that they've seen, which has been driven primarily by CBU. But I don't mean to lay blame at the feet of CBU, who is a legitimate educational institution. I can tell you there are other institutions in Canada that give me far more concern.
Could maybe a few of you talk about how do we tailor this mass-produced or factory-produced housing program that you're talking about today, the catalog, if you like, to us? Is it our climate? Is it our wood? Can you give an example or two of what that might look like to tailored to Atlantic Canada?
So I'll just answer that. Yeah. So we see modular. Like, one of the realities of rural Atlantic Canada is there isn't really a lot of infrastructure to build homes. So we saw that when we had the fires in Shelburne, when we were looking at who's going to rebuild there and where are the construction workers. So we know that modular will be a solution for that. So how we tailor that is through pre-approval. So we know we have designs that meet the building codes. We can have designs that are, and again, as you said, for our own climate, our own weather here in Atlantic Canada. So, and we want to see that industry go forward. We want to make more streamlined designs so they can become more efficient, so we can give them, in particular, the designs that are pre-approved, that streamline some of their processes that will work in our climate.
And maybe I can say for us as well, we have a couple of programs where we're working very closely with the modular housing sector. So we have our workforce housing pilot that we have happening right now in New Brunswick, which is going to be focused on modular housing. And we're doing public housing builds. We've committed to doing 380 public housing builds ourselves. Many of those will be modular housing. So we'll be investing with and working with the modular manufacturers to have agreed upon floor plans for those different types of housing, and those are exactly the type of thing that we could then contribute to the Atlantic piece of the catalog.
Newfoundland and Labrador has been looking at modular homes as well, and the design piece is very important to us because of our unique climate. So what we'd be doing is hopefully being able to design modular homes that will be able to not only use in the province of Newfoundland and Labrador, but in Labrador in particular. So important, especially if we look at the North Coast and so on. So this, hopefully, through this design process and by working with my counterparts from Atlantic Canada, we'll be able to come up with designs that will suit each of our provinces.
If I can just add one piece that didn't come up, in addition to the technical or climate-related design features you want to embed into the catalog, we got to recognize the capacity of smaller communities. We're in Halifax today, but most of Atlantic Canada is rural. And if I look at some of the housing providers who do it on a nonprofit basis that will be very interested in saving money on the design of a new building, you're dealing with volunteer-run organizations that have a handful of people who are sometimes looking at smaller individual buildings than the ones that you see when you look out the window behind you. If we actually recognize not only the technical requirements to build in certain challenging environments, but the capacity of smaller communities and the people who volunteer their time to build housing for their neighbors, we'll be able to actually create a series of designs that will be used to a much higher degree.
Mr. Lantz, are the housing needs of PEI as significant as what you hear from other regions of the Atlantic Canada?
Absolutely, and if anything, I'd argue that they may be more severe. I said today that Prince Edward Island for the better part of a century had a reasonably stable population, and we've increased at rates that at one point was the greatest in the country. I think we've got a vacancy rate of about 0.9% in the province. So all of the problems that we discuss when we get together are very similar in Prince Edward Island. And I was just going to say, with regard to modular, we've got a bit of a head start with modular builds. We've done a couple of modular builds in partnership with the Canadian Mental Health Association. And I just want to add to the previous question, like coming from many years in the software business, this whole idea of a localized, standardized design catalog, sort of from a standardization perspective, a plug-and-play perspective, the ability to work within the same ecosystem. It makes sense on many practical levels. I think you've heard us just sort of outline why it makes sense in many different ways. And we don't, at this point, have a modular factory yet in Prince Edward Island. We've got some interest in starting up, but if we're going to build this industry in the region, then there needs to be fair access to supports to help build that industry up. And we're certainly in the same position as the other provinces, and modular is something that will be a part of the mix going forward to help with some of the labor constraints and other things that are holding us back.
Did anybody come up with a nickname? There used to be nicknames after the Second World War for some of these houses. Come up with any Atlantic housing names?
Working on it.
Check back with us in April.
Yeah. Are there any pricing guidelines for these modular homes, and how is that going to be adjusted for different markets that have different existing prices?
So look, I don't want to risk getting too far ahead of ourselves. We're literally launching the national consultation on the contents of the catalog this month. What we expect to come out of that is recommendations on what might be appropriate from a pricing point of view, but ultimately we're not trying to dictate what the price is going to be for something that exists in the market. We're trying to reduce the cost of production. When we're we're dealing with the designs that we're going to be looking at, we're going to be looking for labor-efficient designs that can be built in a factory with fewer workers, given the labor shortage that the construction sector is dealing with. We're going to be looking for cost-effective designs that use the lightest materials possible without compromising on the quality of the actual building that people will inhabit at the end of the day. So cost factors very much go into it, and we're hoping to come up with designs that are quality buildings that people will enjoy living in, but that can be produced more cheaply than something that's being built in the market today. But again, before we predict what the typical unit might actually cost to produce, we need to actually go through the consultation process, which is literally beginning before the end of the month.
Do you have any estimates on how much you could shave from a bill?
It's difficult to say until you start to see uptake. There's economies of scale, and even now, because there's a difference between production and the cost of purchase at the end. If you're dealing with the cost of purchase, you're usually in a market environment, and the seller will sell what the buyer will pay for what the buyer will pay. We do anticipate that we're going to be able to have significant savings on the production side for a few reasons, and I won't have a percent figure for you because the practice will prove the correct answer. But when you can manufacture year-round in an indoor environment, you can have quality control that may not be possible when you're putting a building up in the middle of winter. You're less likely to run into project delays as a result of weather events. Machines can operate with a degree of efficiency and precision that people using tools will not be able to achieve. And the big difference maker is going to be on volume. So until we actually see the uptake in the catalog, it's difficult to see what it's going to produce. But if you realize a series of designs that may apply across Atlantic Canada or even the whole country require the same components, factories will be able to place orders for 10,000 units of a given project rather than one at a time. And when you have those economies of scale, you tend to see the price go down over time. So practice will prove exactly the impact on costs, but I expect the savings, both in terms of labor and material cost, will be significant and will help restore a reasonable cost to building in a sector that's been hit by higher costs of labor, materials, supplies, interest, and land, all of which have been driving the cost up over the past few years.
Mr. Lohr,
This will be the last question.
our audience, our listeners are going to want to know after this meeting, there's a lot of talk about modular housing. When will this modular housing suddenly appear in Nova Scotia? What part of the province? When will that happen? When will we see it?
So I think I can say that we have modular housing now. It's happening now. We're hoping, so it's here now.
Based on this catalog and your discussions today, how will this kickstart the construction or the emergence of modular housing, and where will they be?
So in terms of where, I mean, we see this as being a solution for the very rural parts of the province, but it's also a solution for apartment builds too. It's very possible that we'll have modular apartment builds as well in that streamlined catalog. I expect we will. So it takes time to build these things out, but I would think that, we're on get it done as fast as we can. I'm certainly hopeful that we would be seeing changes in mid or late summer. Like we want to see, it just depends on how long it takes to build this out, but we need it now, clearly. We have a major supply issue in Nova Scotia, and we're seeing our province change. The demographics of Nova Scotia are changing. We're, for the first time in 102 years last year, we actually got our median age went down. We're very much wanting to see our province continue to grow. We want to encourage immigration, people coming to Nova Scotia. We realize that to do that, we have to address the housing crisis. So Nova Scotia is growing, and that has been a long time since you could say that. So we want to enable that.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we